So we're going to start the program today with the first part on page 43. This is infection prevention. You know, the whole thing about this is whenever you start talking about infection prevention, the first thing we have to know is what's that enemy that we're actually going to. We have to identify what it is. And we've talked about this in the sessions already. Going to get a little bit more into it today because there's these microorganisms. We cannot see these. Daryl and I have talked about this repeatedly so far. And the whole thing here is that whenever you're looking at these microorganisms, some of these are harmful. Some of these cause an illness. And if left go and not controlled, some can kill you. Now, notice in all three of these, we said some, and that is the important thing to remember here. Not all microorganisms are bad. Your body is made up of microorganisms, single cell organisms that you cannot see by the naked eye. So as you look at this first part, that's what we're talking about in that first paragraph. Now, there's a route of these infections. These infections come to us in many different ways. There's many factors that will promote one of those microorganisms becoming an infectious agent. Not all of these are. There's many factors that are going to dictate whether that is going to be one that causes illness, one that causes a disease, or one that will kill you. Now, it's not the work of a single microbe that's going to do this. Understand, these have to join together. They have to adapt to your body. They have to multiply. They have to become, kind of one with your system in order for this to happen. So we're not talking about a single microbe can do this. What we're talking about here is pathogenic microbes. That's the way I would prefer that we think of this. These are, we're going to talk about bacterias and viruses and that later on in the program today. Just think of it. Not a single microbe can do this, and not all microbes do it. So whenever you look at this and you look here, there's a whole list of different things here, the bugs, the disease-causing ones. There's many paths of getting these infectious agents to you. Now, I will tell you, and Daryl will jump in anytime during this part, if you disagree or agree, if that would be, there is a source of the infectious agent, and typically in the environments that you and I live and work in, it's us. We are the ones that transport these infectious microbes from one place to the other predominantly. And that's because of these hands. We are the biggest carriers. We are the biggest movers of the ones that are creating those issues for us. Now, these microbes that have become infectious, they have to, as I said before, they have to kind of become one with my body. Our body is engineered to fight off many, many, many of these infectious agents, but not always does it happen. This is as we all know, the flu season. We're right in the middle of it. I think Daryl mentioned last time, we're getting ready to go into the second round of the flu season for the year. And so the microbe has to find that right environment. Well, I'm a perfect environment. I breathe, that means I've got oxygen. I've got moisture, what my body's mainly made of. So I've got the right host for those infectious agents. So that's what happens when we catch the flu and these other things that we're talking about. So that's that chain of what's happening in our environment. How does it move to us? How does it move around? We're the biggest carriers. Now, you always hear people say germs, and you hear some people will say bacteria or virus. Well, germs is not a scientific term. We've just kind of used this term to kind of be that catch-all for everything. Not that it's bad, it's just not very specific. And so today we're going to get very specific in what those germs are, because you need to know what you're fighting in order to know, well, am I taking care of the right thing at the right place? there's many of these little things that are floating around. And so that word germs takes care of bacteria, virus, fungi. Those are the three main ones in an environment that we're actually taking care of. These are the ones that we're working on. Now, the picture here with all the little green things, those are more appropriate to what we're actually fighting rather than those little funny ones over there. So that's the difference between germs and actually the bacteria that we're actually after. They're not all fun and games. But if you just take the word germs, these are microorganisms that can infect us as well as what many of us have as pets at home. And I think Daryl mentioned last time, the birds, parrots, we can, with our dogs, our cats. It doesn't really matter. Most of the microorganisms that can be on us can be on them and vice versa. We're both good hosts for it. And so that's why they move around. Only 10%, and I don't know, this figure may have changed, Daryl. I'm not sure if it's 100% accurate today because some of these figures change as things go. But basically, 10% of the bacteria that is out there can be pathogenic. But now, as I said, just because it's pathogenic does not mean that it is going to harm me. It has to live with me first. My body's going to fight it off. So just because it's pathogenic doesn't mean it's going to affect me, but it might affect you. And that's the whole thing. We're only talking about 10%. 90% of the bacteria that's out there is actually healthy. I have to have it. That's the way I live. If I don't have bacteria that is healthy, well, I just can't live. So I thought this was interesting when this came up, and Daryl provided a number of these statistics for us over the years. 4% of our actual body weight is bacteria. So, when I heard that custodian say, oh, you know what, I'm here to kill all the bacteria. No, you're not. No, you're not. You are not there to kill all the bacteria. You are there to only kill the pathogenic bacteria that can cause illness, death, and problems in our life. So remember what we were just talking about here. Use the terms correctly, use them appropriately, and by all means, remember, you are not there to kill all the bacteria.
Dave, and just a note, but the disinfectants that we use don't differentiate between the good and the bad if it's on a surface. You're only talking about our bodies that have bacteria, even in our digestive tract, that helps keep a healthy, digestive system. So we need bacteria to help break down the food, and so that then it's, supports our body through energy and supplying us with what we need to live.
If the food isn't broke down by the bacteria, we do not get any energy from the microorganisms that's in the food. The reason we eat food, the reason we drink stuff, the reason there's calories and proteins and all this is because that's where we get our energy from. These microbes, these bacteria extract the energy cells from these nutrients, and that's how our bodies live. So Daryl, I totally agree. Without bacteria, I'm going to die.
Right.
All right. So let's get to the one that really causes a large amount of the issues, and especially at this time, and this is viruses. Now, these little boogers, and I'm saying little, are very small. They're smaller than bacteria. So I think as we go into this, I want you to kind of understand, as I just said a minute ago, viruses need a living host. I am, my pet is. These are the ones that they need to live with, reproduce, because they can survive for a limited period outside of the host, but they survive better in the host. And this is where you get all of these others. Daryl, anything else you'd like to say on this one before we go on?
Well, viruses, if you compare a virus to a bacterium, if you figure our personage, if we're 6 feet tall, a virus, we will represent bacteria. A virus would be like a tiny mouse. So
I have some slides for that, Daryl. I will have those coming up. But
okay, but just to give you an idea, and that's why viruses attach themselves to bacteria, because you can have anywhere from 100 to 10,000 viruses in single bacteria.
And I think that's the point that we make, is that we want to talk about the smallest one first, because as you go up, things attach themselves to each other. So that's why very often you'll have a virus and a bacteria together, because they can go hand in hand, many times do. So this time of the year is the influenza virus, or as everybody says, they just use the word flu for short. Well, this is a viral infection. When you get the cold, and you get the runny nose, you get the fever, all of that stuff. Now, there's a number of other things that happen along with this, or not at the same time, but are also in the same category. And that's the HIV, the human, and I never can say the word correctly.
Immunodeficiency.
There you go. That's why we're both on here together. You get this virus, you get the hepatitis B virus, you get the norovirus. All of these are because of a very, very, very small item, a very small pathogenic bacteria, virus that can actually get into your body, adapt, multiply, and that's when we have a real trouble with it. This is very common this time of the year. Every year, the flu takes down around 5 to 20% of the population every year. And I think, Daryl, you were saying that we're even supposed to be getting into a worse time this year on the second round.
Yeah, it's just hitting later, and I think it's probably peaked, but it may be headed down, but we're probably in for another 4 to 6 weeks of the flu sticking around, which is later than normal.
And that being said, that season, that flu season is going longer, and so the 200,000 people that have been typically influenza complications, this is actually growing because now we have a longer period of time that this is affecting us. And this flu season can be, well, it's getting very unpredictable. And because of these things and the weather that we're having right now, it could be very severe. Now, I know that there was this period of time that they gave us some numbers, and it's just here to kind of give you an idea of the severity of what this can be. Up to 50,000 people during this period of time actually died because of the flu. So I want to tell you, virus can be very deadly to a lot of our population when we don't think about it. Now, I think one of the interesting things, Daryl, and I know you like to talk about this, let me go through this and you can chime in. How long can it stay outside of my body? Well, the thing here is given the right amount of those things it needs to live, 8 to 12 hours on paper or cloth. So think of those paper towels that are thrown over to the wastebasket. Think of that, the old rolled towels that were cloth towels that we pulled. Okay, 8 to 12 hours on those. 24 to 48 hours on a non-porous hard surface. So like the countertop, the bed tray, the nightstand, the bed rail, all of those things. And wait till you get into that restroom or into that shower, 72 hours on that surface. Daryl, you always like to talk about this.
Yeah, because, when you talked earlier, Dave, about routes of entering our bodies, it's when we touch these surfaces within those 8 to 12 hours on cloth, or paper, think about those Kleenexes and trash cans, some ones that work with still fighting the flu. I mean, they're very contagious before they even started exhibiting any flu-like symptoms. So that person that's appears to be perfectly well today is starting to run a temperature. They haven't started the real flu-like symptoms, but tomorrow morning they're going to call in sick. Well, how many people infected, left those viruses on those hard surfaces, soft surfaces, and even the wet surfaces? So, but the routes of transmission is when we touch those, then we rub our eyes. A normal person touches their face about 15 to 20 times an hour, either touching your eyes, your nose, your mouth, and that's how we take it from the surface into our bodies. It doesn't need an open sore or cut or anything like that. It's just from your hand to your eyes, your nose, your mouth.
Sorry about that, Daryl. Hit the button there.
Okay.
But you're right. So this is a lot of different ways, and I think we kind of jump here a little bit. Sorry about that. We're actually kind of going between page 47. You saw staph infections. I think we've got a slide a little out of order, but hey, it's live presentation, so what are you going to do? Let's go ahead and talk about this, though, since we got it up here. MRSA is a strain of staph, and this is exactly an indication of this staph issue. This is a piece of your skin, and as the bacteria gets in here and creates the problem, becomes one with your body, it attacks your white blood cells, and then as it comes to the surface and infects the surface here, whenever these actually push through and break through the skin, that infected area, this is where the MRSA cells, this is where the problem actually comes about. And whenever it busts through the skin and then can get onto other surfaces, this is where those infectious microbes really create that issue. So one of the things that you always hear us talk about is to keep this issue cleaned and protected. So you let it go, you let it take care of itself, because MRSA is antibiotic resistant. So it kind of has to run its course. We don't have an antibiotic we can throw at it. Basically, you clean it, you keep it protected. But this is, everybody says, well, how does it come out and how do you get it? And I found this picture. I thought it was very helpful in understanding that. Daryl?
Yeah, sometimes it can appear like a boil under the skin. And, so that this picture is a pretty fair representation of that. And by the time it actually raises the skin and the pus begins to ooze from it, it's already taken a real bloodstream sort of infection. So I know that we're going to talk about it later, but this infection is capable of killing people, and so we need to take cleaning very seriously, because of this is one of those contact isolations that are contact bacteria that once it gets out on the surface, you can't see it, but that's why our job role of cleaning and disinfection is key to killing that MRSA. But like Dave said, there may not be antibiotics to kill it, but once it's outside the body and on a surface, the disinfectants that you are using today will eliminate this from being a source of transmission to other people.
Daryl, go ahead and since we're there, go ahead and talk about this right here.
Yeah, antibiotics. I know that people, with small children with, they've got the sniffles and the cold and the flu, and, so they want to take them to the doctor and get an antibiotic so that they can get back into school. And so you cannot take antibiotics for viral infections. They're only effective against bacterial infections, but even there it's limited, because what the antibiotics don't kill in the bacteria world, it's the old saying, if you don't kill it, it only gets stronger. So that's why we have these drug-resistant organisms like MRSA and VRE and others. But here the takeaway is just that you cannot get antibiotics for viral infections.
So moving back into the bacteria where we should be, sorry about that staph in there, but hey, we've got it out of the way. Whenever we're talking about bacteria, this is, well, these are large. And I think this is what Daryl said a minute ago. If a bacteria were human size, then a virus would be the size of this quarter-size mouse. So
Yeah.
I think this is a very good picture of the difference between the two. And so you're talking about, but understand, both of these are microbes, one-cell organisms, just difference in the size of those one-cell organisms. So we're in both of these cases, we're talking about things that we can't see.
Yeah, and that viruses can, they are so small that, we can't go on what's visibly soiled. We have to assume that all surfaces are soiled with something, a microorganism that we cannot see. So working around cleaning and disinfection in hospitals, we have to assume that every surface is potentially hazardous to the health of patients and or staff.
Well, and to your point, this is what we're talking about here. The bacteria can reproduce independently of us. They don't need us to reproduce like a virus does. Bacteria is in soil, it's in water, in hot springs, ice packs, plants, animals. Bacteria is everywhere. And this is why we were saying, you've got to understand that both of these are single cell. So if I can't see a bacteria, just think of this. I can't see a virus either.
Right.
So whenever Daryl was saying it's not visibly soiled, I can tell you it is still soiled as far as a pathogenic bacteria or virus. It is going to be soiled. You do not have to see it. And this is why we talk about this, because there are many infections, and this is just a few of the infections that we wanted to show you today, because these are the common infections from bacterias that we deal with probably almost daily with any one of our staff members, the visitors that come to our buildings, the patients that are there. Almost everybody that comes in, somebody has these or multiples of these. And these are just some of the very common ones that you have. So we just want you to understand that antibiotics can kill the bacteria, but they have no effect on a virus. So this is why, Daryl, you like to always say, I can go in and get a pill for some things I can't.
Yeah. And, if you picture a lock on a door, that lock is, or that door itself is the disease, and the lock on the door is an antibiotic. So the antibiotic in a lot of these cases will unlock that door and cure what ails you. If it's an ear infection or a strep throat or whatever, that key works in that door. But wherever we get to some of these organisms like the MRSA, the antibiotic doesn't work. The key doesn't work to that door. But when you picture disinfectants, the disinfectant is like a sledgehammer to that door. And it doesn't care, whether it finesses the lock or not. It just smashes the door. And so the disinfectant that we deliver to surfaces is between 10 and 100,000 times stronger than the antibiotic that the doctor can give you. If antibiotics were as toxic as disinfectants, it would kill you. The antibiotic would kill you. You don't have to worry about the disease killing you. The antibiotic would kill you if we were delivering antibiotics at the same dosage and kill factor as disinfectants.
Well, and this is, Daryl, and exactly what we're going to be talking about next week when we talk about the products that we use and where we use them. This is exactly to the point of why you have to be extremely careful with the products that we're using because of the severity of what they can do to you. Because You have to have bacteria. You have to have this stuff. We cannot deal with these toxic agents in our bloodstream, in our bodies. So just remember what we're talking about here, because Daryl's going to take this for a little while. I think this is one of the issues that is very personal to Daryl. And Daryl, if you might want to talk about maybe your personal issue with staph and MRSA.
Yeah, MRSA is the reason why I wrote my little book, The Infection Prevention for Dummies. Just another picture of that. But my daughter-in-law at the time was 37 years old and training for Iron Woman competition and spending a lot of time in a workout facility, lifting weights and what have you. And she got an infection in this part of her hand between her thumb and her forefinger, and within 8 weeks was dead. It was from MRSA that she got that turned into a bloodstream infection, and left my son with 3 kids, and the youngest was 18 months old at the time. And so it impacted our family. And this was in a community acquired infection and not a hospital acquired infection. And so here is methicillin is that drug that's kind of the end of the line for antibiotics. Penicillin, oxacillin, amoxicillin, those are all lower level antibiotics, but methicillin is like the highest, it's like the peak of the mountain. And if we get bacteria that's resistant to methicillin, it means that it cannot be killed. And so this is the threat to the world population, is that we're going to get some sort of a drug resistant organism that just kills tens of millions of people. And if that ever happens, even today, the way that we prevent that is through certifying environmental services technicians. And so we're going to talk about that again, I think, Dave. But anyway, I just want you to know that MRSA is nothing to mess with, because there is no real antibiotic to cure it. People who recover from it may have it for the rest of their life, and it just goes through quiet periods, and then it'll flare up, and people lose limbs, an arm, a leg, both arms, both legs to MRSA.
Well, I think to your point, Daryl, you said about community associated. Here we're talking about hospital-acquired MRSA. And one of our regional campuses in California, David Swindle, his father went in to the hospital for an issue, has contracted MRSA now, and they're fighting this issue currently with him. And so, he's a lifelong custodian. He's part of our program. Our thoughts go out to him and his family right now as they fight this exact issue that we're talking about today, because there's many different ways that this happens. And Daryl, I'd let you go ahead.
Well, I think that, surgery is, anytime that you have surgery, I've had both my knees replaced the night before I showered, but I used the betadine solution as I showered, because I needed to get the staph off of my skin. That once you cut into that skin, if you don't kill the staph that's on the skin, then you introduce staph into that surgical incision. So the night before and the morning of the surgery, I showered with a betadine solution just to kill the staph on my skin. And if you have antibiotics, you're setting yourself up for something that the antibiotics won't kill. So like I said earlier, if you're not killing it, then you're only making it stronger, and those bacteria will change, will morph into something more virulent than the regular staph infection. In this case, it's methicillin resistant staph. And the odd thing about these things, once they develop, is that they can pass on their their resistance to antibiotics onto other bacteria. So, you know, it's not just that they are resistant to methicillin, but they pass on that resistance to other bacteria. And before you know it, you know, it's serious consequences.
I think one of the things, Daryl, you pointed out before we leave the hospital-associated MRSA is that we have the right to find out what that patient was if we go in, you know, who was the last one that was in there. And this is why the EVS technician is so important whenever we come to this, because, I mean, think about this. If you were the patient, if you were the one coming in, wouldn't you want to know that the EVS technician took care of that room appropriately before you came in there? You just heard all of the stuff that Daryl went through before he went in, doing the best that he could to make sure that he came out correctly. I think our job is to make sure that we've done exactly what we need to do. When we say we are technicians and we save lives, we really do mean it. And this is very important that you understand the importance. And we're just talking about one thing here. We're just talking about MRSA by itself because that's where we're at. Now, the thing is that MRSA happens inside of a hospital. But as Daryl said, MRSA happens outside of that hospital. So don't just think of your role only there. Where can we also instruct other people outside of the healthcare environment that these things are not just in one area, they are in both. And we need to understand the value and the severity of what we're doing, because MRSA spreads very quickly. It looks like a spider bite, and many people just don't realize that's what they're doing, and they see that pus coming out, and that's when that's when they start doing something, and by that time it's already going around. And this is where it has a tendency just to keep going because people don't take care of things. Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah. And I guess my point here is that not all people who have MRSA are in hospitals. You know, they get well enough to go home and they shop where you shop and they work in the office cubicle next to you. They go to school where your kids go to school. Some of the deaths, community-acquired deaths that attributed to MRSA have happened in schools, you know, high school and college age kids. Even in professional football, the place kicker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers probably 10 years ago lost half of his foot to MRSA that he contracted in their training facility. But so not everyone with MRSA is in a hospital. They're out there mingling with you, and that's why I never pass up a chance to use one of those sanitizing wipes on the shopping cart handle. If they're available, I'm wiping everything down. Yeah.
Well, we just wanted to give you a very calm picture of a spider bite that you can see is truly infected. And this is the early stages of MRSA, because just a little while after this is when this comes up. And we didn't really want to get too graphic with our pictures here, but just give you an idea how calm it looks and then what it can actually do, because these are skin infections. And so this is something that we need to be aware of. It's life-threatening, as you've heard us talk about. This is frequently among patients in healthcare, just really don't recognize the fact until it's too late. So I think one of the things here from the CDC, this has been out for quite some time. There are 5 C's: crowding, contact of skin, compromised skin, contaminated items, and then the lack of cleanliness. So whenever you're thinking about how we can contract these issues, and we're only talking about MRSA here, but this goes for everything. This goes for all of our viruses, all our bacteria, fungi, all of the staph. These 5 things here are largely what is causing the issues, because this is people to people. This is the way that the chain of infection happens, and it's usually through one, if not all, of these 5 things. So yeah, I think, Daryl, we need to talk about...
Dave,
yep.
Back up one slide, but all I would say about that is that very last one there, the cleanliness or the lack of the cleanliness. That's where we have the opportunity to keep this from happening, is through proper cleaning and disinfection. So go on to the next one.
It's all yours, my friend.
Yeah, when we talk about processing, you know, we're not going to talk about, or we're not going to use the term cleaning. We use the term processing, which means a microdenier cloth that, you know, is think about a lens cloth that you would get from the optometrist's office to clean your eyeglasses. That's the very fine denier microfiber. And it's clean microfibers. Then it's also the disinfectant, or that is hospital approved, and then a wiping motion. You know, the friction that we talked about goes along with soil removal, capturing it in the microfiber cloth and not releasing it or transferring it to other surfaces until that cloth is laundered. But cleaning is not the same as disinfecting or sanitizing, because I've seen people go into a restroom and spray disinfectant on everything in the restroom to give it the 10-minute dwell time or whatever, and then walk out and think that they have cleaned and disinfected. And that doesn't happen. Cleaning has got to be an operation that happens before disinfection. And when we clean a surface with microdenier cloth and remove the soil, then it gives the disinfectant a much better chance of doing its job. The cleaning is a removal of, the definition of cleaning is removal of all foreign material from objects by using water and detergents like soaps and enzymes, and the mechanical action of washing or scrubbing the object. So it's not just spraying a cleaner on there and walking away, but you have to do the removal, you know, of the soil. Water must be clean and potable and kept clean. And once the water becomes visibly soiled, it must be changed for clean water. So I have walked through facilities, Dave, you have too, and you look in the mop bucket that's outside, you know, the restroom door that they're getting ready to clean that restroom, or clean is air quotes, because the water is as black as coffee, and black coffee. And, you know, they're going to clean a floor using dirty water. So tell me how that works for you. So chemical dilution, you know, here's a chart. You know, you have to mix that chemical with water in order at the proper concentrations. And I don't know if you're still measuring chemicals like we did 100 years ago, but if you are, here's a chart, and they're available, whether it's, you know, a lot of disinfectants are 1 to 64, which means that it's 2 ounces per gallon, because there's 128 ounces in a gallon. So if it's 1 to 64, that means to make a gallon, you have to use 2 ounces. If it's a 1 to 128, it's 1 ounce. But anyway, so you have water, you have the chemical, you have the right amount of time. Ample time must be allotted in order to remove all the soils from a surface. And then the last one is, well, here we see.
Daryl, I put these 2 slides in here for a little bit of a reason, because, you know, many times people don't understand that if they just simply take and use their detergent and wipe over it, it basically just leaves a soil like this, because you've just kind of wiped over it. You didn't give it enough time for the detergents and the disinfectants to get in. What we're actually wanting is the more time that you have, the more you can break the soil up like this. And now the product that we've used can pull that soil up and suspend it, so we actually remove it. So the idea of simply spraying and wiping the surface, what that does is it only takes away the visible soil. It really doesn't help to get down to the material that's actually down in that substrate. Don't want to get too far into this, but this is why we need to give it an amount of time dependent on the product. We'll get into that when we talk next week. Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, on agitation, these four elements, if you think about a wash machine that you throw your clothes in to clean once a week or however often, you have, these four elements. You have the water, you have the chemical, you have the time that it takes to run through a cycle, and the agitation of that, what do you call those things down in the tub? The agitator. But it's a combination of all four of those that if you think about a wash machine, you need those same four elements when you're cleaning surfaces. But scrub brushes or abrasive pads or microfiber cloths, all are abrasive materials. And then the agitation also is the good old scrubbing power, clean like a Dutchman or whatever you want to call it. But, there's scrubbing that is involved in soil removal and also breaking that biofilm, kind of that substrate on that previous slide that Dave showed. But that biofilm contains a thick matrix of a lot of bacteria and other things that will quickly repopulate a surface that's been cleaned if we don't remove the biofilm. So
now, just before you get into this, Daryl, Justin, do we have any questions? I know we've been going for about 40 minutes or so. Any questions?
No.
Nope. I just want to make sure we didn't lose everybody.
Okay, whenever I would be training a new employee, educating them, I would say, what's the definition of clean? And they would say, well, you vacuum and then you wipe this and then you wipe that and then you empty the trash. I said, those are the steps to clean. But what is the definition of clean? It's no dust, no spots, no smudges, and no smells. And that equals clean. So, if you want to define when you're working with training or educating your staff, talk about this definition of clean so that whenever you come in to do an inspection, that's what you're looking for. No dust, no spots, no smudges, and no smells. And that's the way that we define clean. Disinfecting is a separate operation, does not place too much emphasis on the type of disinfectant being used. It could be quartz, phenolics, chlorine, accelerated hydrogen peroxide. But the factor that's important is that you use the appropriate type and concentration of disinfectant, and that's being applied to a pre-cleaned surface. And I've said before that, if you want to see how much soil is on a surface that looks visually clean, just take a white paper towel, wet it with water, wipe it on that surface, and it comes up any other color other than white, then it's greater than 5% soil on a surface. And you don't see that, but it's there. And so disinfectant should be applied to pre-cleaned surfaces. And then you have to have the frequency of cleaning and disinfection, and we're going to talk about that in the steps of processing patient rooms. It's really key here because there are a lot of pieces of patient care equipment. It could be in those patient rooms. It could be anywhere in the facility, but who actually is responsible for cleaning and disinfecting each one of those pieces of patient care equipment? That is something that needs to be identified. Just think about going into an operating room and there's hundreds of pieces of equipment in there, and environmental services doesn't clean every one of those. So the assumption is because we're housekeeping, we're environmental services, we clean everything, and that's not a fact. The fact is that there are many things that housekeeping does not clean. But whoever is in that role of cleaning and disinfection needs to have the same level of education about cleaning and disinfection as the housekeeper does, because if the housekeeper isn't tasked with cleaning that particular piece of equipment, somebody does, and they need to use the same techniques that the environmental services, the professional cleaning staff does. And then we have to have a way of verifying, checking, monitoring compliance with cleaning and disinfection protocols. And so it's called measuring clean. And we say that surface is clean. I think the next one, Dave, is kind of gets into, well, no, I think we talk about that a little bit later with ATP, but
Yes, we do.
here we need to minimize the contamination of wipes and mops. And the key takeaway here is that we don't, if you want to go to the next one, Dave, we don't, bucket solutions, where I said earlier about one of the elements of cleaning is clean water. Bucket solutions become contaminated almost immediately during cleaning. And if you're mopping floors, then, if you don't use the right bucket system, then that water very quickly becomes contaminated and needs to be changed for clean. Clean solution should be replaced frequently so that, the water doesn't become contaminated. So if you took a canister of pre-saturated disinfectant wipes and we wiped a surface, how many people then take that wipe after they've used it on that bed rail and try to stick it back into that canister and recharge it? If we don't do that with wipes, then why do we do it with microfiber and mop water and bucket water? Here is, this is probably a quaternary disinfectant, but you see a test strip there. And so once you start introducing cotton wipers into a quat disinfectant, the active ingredients in the quat disinfectant bind to that cotton cloth and they deplenish the quat, and that's why that test strip was showed earlier to test the water, and you have to deliver that disinfectant to the parts per million, as the label says it is a disinfectant or a sanitizer.
Daryl, I think your whole point here is, and I think you've made this several times, I know you were talking about the mop bucket, but I was thinking about the whole time was, I knew what slides were coming up here, and I'm thinking, I've seen this many, many times where the cafeteria lady takes these buckets of what you just saw and the cotton rag and wipes the tables down and then wipes the seats down and then goes over to the next one and does the same thing with the same bucket of solution. And as you think about this, we've talked to you so much about the severity of the practices that we use. We no more than you would take that wiper that Daryl mentioned and put it back into that bucket of wipes. No different is that than the bucket that we're using. So by all means, we just don't want to be using dip buckets to do this. So when you think about whether the floors are one thing, I do agree with that, but I'm really thinking about all these areas that I see people using dip buckets for hand wiping, the high touch surfaces.
Right.
And this really, really is a problem, especially, well, not especially because, everywhere that we're working, we as EVS technicians simply cannot use contaminated cloths from, I don't care what type of a bucket, it's got to be an uncontaminated disinfectant solution in order for that product to do the job that we bought it for. Because you know what? You guys are doing the effort. You're doing the hard work. You need to get the results that is protecting the health of those people in that facility. I've heard too many of these stories where we haven't done our job appropriately. And so we want to make sure that you understood that today. Because next week when we get talking about the chemicals and the steps, remember what we talked about today. I think we're getting ready here to take care of a patient room.
That's right, Dave. So there's the 7 steps of daily cleaning or processing of a patient room. The very first one is high dust. We were talking earlier about fomites and vectors, and a fomite is something that is inanimate. It's not living, breathing. But we also talked about how that fomites can attach themselves to dust, and that's how they travel around the healthcare facility, is through dust. And so our enemy is the dust, and I think that too often we just wet clean it and say that it's taken care of. But here we're talking about processes that start high to low because of gravity. If you use a duster and dust falls off that ledge, then it falls to the floor. It's going to get mopped and removed later. But we need to control the dust, and so we high dust everything shoulder height and above. And the best practice is to use a HEPA filtered vacuum to remove that dust.
Now, I just want to add a little bit to that, Daryl, before you go on to the next one, because everybody says, what's the best way? And people using microfiber dusters are very good. A damp microfiber is better, yes, but a HEPA filtered vacuum is the best. And here's the reason why. As you're working with this above your head, remember this: dust settles at a rate of 1 foot per hour. So if you do this dusting 2 to 3 to 4 feet above that patient's bed, in 4 hours, it's now hit that patient's bed if we didn't control the way we took it off of that surface. So that's why your HEPA filter vacuum is the best way above these surfaces where the patient or your resident is going to be. Just wanted to include that. Go on, Daryl.
Next one, we work from top to bottom and from clean to dirty. So second step is to empty the trash. And, the steps here is to never push down the trash in that trash can. I don't care if you use your foot, don't do it. Just don't do it. But use the appropriate liner for that trash can as you replace it, and never mix regulated or red bag trash with regular trash. And sometimes your workers may come across where they're looking into a trash can, getting ready to pull the regular waste, and they see a bloody object in there. That someone has contaminated that whole trash can with something that now is, that whole trash can needs to be treated as regulated waste, because you don't know what blood has seeped down into the rest of the trash. So you don't reach in and pull out the bloody gauze from the dressing that they changed. It should have been in a red bag. It may be in the wrong trash, but that trash now is contaminated, needs to be handled as regulated waste, and needs to go into a red bag. So we damp wipe and disinfect surfaces. This is after you've removed the trash, but here we wear gloves. Dave talked about the right gloves last week, a nitrile glove that fits up above the wrist, but that's to protect the employee from both bloodborne pathogens and the chemicals that they have their hands in. Never, some people will say, well, instead of using a bucket, we'll use a sprayer and spray the disinfectant on the surfaces. So here's where, you get into the situation where spraying chemicals is not good for the workers who are breathing those, not good for the patients who could be asthmatic, and now you're atomizing that spray. So I do not like using spray makers on chemicals. If you have to use a bottle, use a flip top on that bottle and not a sprayer. A flip top, you can squirt the solution onto a cloth and then wipe, but you should use one cloth per room and one mop per room. And actually you should use 2 wipers for a room, and they should be different colors, one for the patient areas and a second one for the patient's restroom. So 2 cloths and 1 mop for each patient room. So the process for the bathroom, using the bucket or that flip top bottle, but mix your disinfectant appropriately. But clean everything in the patient room, patient bathroom that they may have touched. Here you work from clean to dirty. The cleanest part of that room is probably the sink and faucets and the bathtub, and then you wind up at the toilet. So you clean from cleanest to dirtiest, and that way you don't take soil from the toilet and then put it into the sink. Dust mop the floor. I think this is something that we have gotten away from. But Dave, a lot of times you've seen these nice looking floors and they get tacky and sticky, and a lot of that is because they just damp mop a floor and don't dust mop first. But you know, we have to remove that dust so that our mopping becomes more effective.
Daryl, I think the same thing here applies on the floor as it does on all the touch point surfaces that we were talking about. You know, this is part of that pre-cleaning. I can't tell you how many times in healthcare situations I've seen them come in with one mop and do a quick over, and it was damp and they said it did it. Well, that took off the airborne dust that you were talking about that settled to the floor. That didn't do actually anything for cleaning and disinfecting. So as we said, processing is processing. Doesn't matter what surface it's on, whether it be on a high touch point or the floor, it's still a two-step process in a healthcare situation. Because the last thing you're going to do is you're going to go in and wet mop the floor. So you damp mop or you dust mop, whichever way you want to say it. I mean, I've seen people go in with a damp dust mop, and that's great because it picks up more, but it's still a two-step process because you're going to need to use the appropriate chemical, that disinfectant, when we do the floors, and we need to change that pad because you should be using microfiber pads these days instead of cotton mops. I just really hope you're doing that. But you need to change that pad at least every 3 rooms. And if you can, every room, if that's something that you can possibly do, but a minimum of every 3 rooms. And you know, the thing here is train those people to bring things to the door. You don't work towards the back room in the patient's room. You bring that to the door. You bring it out of the room. So, you know, we're going to go into this a little bit more when we get into the procedures. But the last thing you always do is back to what Daryl said. Remember, clean. No dust, no spots, no smudges, no smells. This is why we really do like products that don't leave an after smell. You know, all of the flowery smells that we all like. That's not what we're there to disinfect and process that room for. We need to know that everything's been taken care of. Look around that room. Make sure that we've filled the dispensers, that we've checked everything. And you guys, we went through the things to ask and to talk with the patient. And the last thing you're always going to do, right, is talk with that patient and make sure that that patient or that resident doesn't have something on their list that you've missed, because you know what? They're the ones living there the whole time. Make sure that you check those things off with them as well as yours. Now, this is one that everybody asks, do we have it in the course, Daryl? Terminal discharge.
Yeah, in addition to those 7 steps, we need to remember that it's always clean against clean. So we don't walk into that dirty room. We bring the clean linens, the clean towels, the clean sheets in with us. It has to be processed first. So nothing cleaner or disinfected should be placed on anything dirty. So if you have clean linens, we're not going to put that over on the dirty window ledge that hasn't even been cleaned, or the dirty chair that hasn't been processed. So here's the equipment that we need. And this is our one opportunity that we haven't been able to necessarily high dust over that patient's bed because the patient's always there. And so this is our one opportunity to get everything without the patient and their all their stuff in the way of us doing our job. So this is our one opportunity to break that chain of infection, that chain of transmission. And so we do that dusting over the overhead light. We do strip the bed next. avoid hugging that soil linen. I've seen people take that, ball it all up in the middle of the bed, and then, you know, pick it up and hug it to their uniform. And you're taking all that stuff home with you. If this is not an isolation room, you don't have an isolation gown on to protect, put a barrier between you and that soil linen, then you're taking that home with you. So then take the soiled linen laundry bag, take it to the soiled utility room, or if you have a hamper, place the hamper outside in the hallway, and then you take that to the soiled linen room, soiled utility room, and either goes into a hamper or down the linen chute. This is your chance to pull the bed away from the head wall, to wipe that head wall down, wipe the electrical cords and that baseboard behind the bed that usually is missed in that daily cleaning. Disinfect the patient care equipment if it's your responsibility. Next time we're going to talk about some of this patient care equipment, but things like bedside commodes, IV poles, those kinds of things that get left in a discharged patient room. So if it's your responsibility, then we need to clean it. And then if it needs to go to a, you know, no equipment should leave a room unless it has been cleaned and disinfected. Even if it goes to a equipment room down the hall where all these things go, sometimes, you know, IV poles, even walkers, things like that that go to an equipment room should not leave that room soiled. It should be cleaned and disinfected before it goes to that equipment holding area. Next, we want to raise the bed up to its highest point. That's so that it's kind of like a scissor lift, so that you can see all of those dusty areas underneath the bed. Remember, we need to clean thoroughly and disinfect underneath the bed frame, even the wheels. Sometimes I see these wheels, they've got mop strings on them and hair and all kinds of things, and all that is a breeding ground. So after you wipe all the undercarriage, then return the bed to a waist-high position. This will make it easier for you to make the bed, but we're not ready for that yet. We need to disinfect the surface of the mattress, lift up the head of the mattress, fold it back, wipe that side of the mattress, lay it down, get the foot the same way, so that the entire underneath side of the mattress is disinfected also. Clean the rest of the room according to the 7-step processing, and all the furniture. Remember, the arms of the chairs are high-touch surfaces, and this is your chance to make sure that everything has, all those high-touch surfaces have been cleaned and disinfected. And 10, if you find any personal items, someone left their wallet there, I always advise my staff not to touch the wallet. You go get the nurse, have them come into the room and remove, you know, could be dentures that they left behind, eyeglasses. Those are valuables that the hospital is going to wind up paying for if we don't recover them and make sure that they get to their rightful owner.
So what you're saying here, Daryl, is that before the EVS staff member moves those, they need to bring somebody else in to verify where they were and that they were there, so that everybody is, well, you're talking about covering ourselves in these issues, correct?
Yeah, because you know, someone says, well, I had $500 in that wallet, and if you train your staff not to touch the wallet, you know, they go get someone else, then we can safely say that we didn't, you know, our employee didn't even touch the wallet. So, you know, I've had this happen before, and you know, I've had the patient, you know, so happy to get their wallet or their purse back that they've given my employees, you know, a little reward for being honest and turning it in. But above all, we need to have honest employees, and we need to give the stuff back to its rightful owner.
Yeah.
Once the room is thoroughly clean, disinfected, that's the time to bring in the clean linen, make the bed, and make sure that everything is arranged the way it should be, the furniture is the way it should be, and it's ready for the next patient, and report that bed as being cleaned and ready for the admitting department so that they can admit the next patient that's been waiting in the emergency room for 2 hours for that bed.
All right. So what we've talked about is regular patient resident cleaning, discharge of whenever they've left that room and everything. You know, the question is whenever you take a look at it, you know, the thing is, everybody says, is it clean? Well, as Daryl pointed out, what was it? No spots, no dust, no smudges, no smell. But you know, the thing is, that's clean. That's a perception. That's what we see. Is it healthy is a whole nother issue. That is why you've heard us talk all afternoon this afternoon about the two different things. This is a process. And as you look at this picture, it's pretty obvious. This isn't clean because there's stuff there. We don't know what that is. That may look like blood because that's what we're talking about. But that could be a cherry soda or a smoothie. I don't know what it is. Visibly and healthy are two different things. And I think you mentioned this before as we went through the slides. And this is where we've got to be able to measure what clean is. And so here's a picture of a lady looking through a glass. Why? Because we could see the spots on the glass. We could see dust on it. That's our visual inspection. But when it comes to it, whether that surface is actually healthy is not the same as if it's clean. So if I have this bed issue, this patient area that you just talked about, Daryl, clean and healthy are two different things. We've got to be able to measure our results of what we're doing.
Yeah, because that, if you go back to that picture, that patient room, you know, you can't tell that the prior patient had MRSA. And, you know, if I get admitted to that room and the previous patient had MRSA or C. diff or VRE, my likelihood of getting that same organism is doubled. So, you know, visually clean, it looks like it's the same room and that it's ready for me to get into that bed. But if the EBS person didn't do their job and didn't measure the cleanliness of that room, then, you know, I'm likely, like twice as likely to get what the previous patient had.
And this is what we're talking about, health-based or hygienic cleaning. You know, here is a room that's all white, except for what? The person there, the wiper that she's using, the gloves. I thought this was a perfect picture. Just because it's all white and it's just, there's no visible soil there, does not mean that these contact surfaces are healthy. So I like you're saying, Daryl.
Yeah, one knowledgeable and well-trained professional cleaning staff, given the adequate time and equipped with the best tools, products, and processes, will likely deliver a clean, sanitized, disinfected room, a safe, hygienically clean room. And I would just as soon get rid of the term clean and just go to hygienically clean, because then we know that it's been processed, as we said earlier, with the right microfiber, the right disinfectant, the right time, all those things that are necessary to make it hygienically clean.
So there's different ways that we measure this. I know that one of the ways that we've been doing this is with these markers. They come in all different kinds of colors. They're markers that we can put on a surface to identify whether somebody has come through and done the cleaning process. Here's the problem. What they don't do is they don't tell us whether we did it for hygienic reasons. Just means that we kind of came through and we removed the soils that may have been visible. We may have taken off a certain amount. So while this is a good measure, it doesn't really measure the hygienic part of it. And so what Daryl said earlier is we need to use techniques and devices, and this is one of the ones that is very popular these days. Different manufacturers, this is just one of them. But this is measuring the adenosine triphosphate that is on a surface. Now, what is that? Adenosine triphosphate is the one cell microbe, the energy cell, the one that we talked about at the start of this presentation this afternoon, that gives energy. It doesn't tell me whether it's a bacteria, it doesn't tell me it's a virus, it doesn't tell me it's a fungus. It just tells me there's an energy cell there. So by using this on the surface and doing this test, once that we've processed it, we can actually then scientifically measure the amount of what we've left on the surface. And folks, this is what we've been talking about this afternoon. If you go through all of this effort, if you go through trying to fight and break that chain of infection, and you're the one that's on that front line, that defense mechanism against these infectious agents, I really do believe, and I think Daryl's right along with me this afternoon, that you need to have some type of a measurement as to the effectiveness of the program and the protocol and the process that you have in place.
Yeah, because I look at it, Dave, like a three-legged stool. It's the product, you know, the cleaner, the disinfectant that you're using. It's the process. You know, we've talked about the 7 steps of processing patient care areas. And then the third one is people. So if the product and the process are right, you've proven that both those are right, and you're not getting the right ATP measurements, then it's got to be the person who isn't following those processes or is over diluting the chemicals, whatever it is. If you validate that both the products and the process work, then it's just a matter of educating and training your staff, and then holding them accountable for delivering the right process to leave that room hygienically clean for the next patient. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and I think Dave's going to stick around for the exam. But is there any questions before I go?